The Depths of Marrow. The submersible slowly descended into the dark ocean, the explorers silently watching as the seafloor came into view. Nina, the expedition leader, checked her instruments, feeling a sense of dread as they approached the mysterious wreck below. The ship, half buried in sand, looked ancient, its rusted hull a stark contrast to the pristine blue surrounding it. Theo, one of the divers, activated his headlamp and motioned to the others to follow him toward the ominous structure. Elena, the marine biologist, marveled at the strange, intricate carvings visible on the ship's exterior, but something felt off. The team floated cautiously through the water as they approached a gaping hole in the ship's side, their lights barely piercing the gloom. Inside, the ship's interior was a labyrinth of tangled metal, collapsed beams, and shattered glass, as if something terrible had happened long ago. Nina signaled for everyone to spread out and investigate different sections, the heavy silence pressing in from all sides. Theo's light caught something glinting beneath the silt, and when he reached down, his fingers brushed against cold, polished metal. It was an ornate, ancient-looking box, covered in strange symbols that made his skin crawl the longer he stared at them. "Guys, you need to see this," Theo said through the calms, his voice strained as he held the box up for the others to see. Nina floated over, her eyes narrowing as she studied the symbols, an inexplicable sense of unease growing within her. Elena hovered nearby, noting the box's construction seemed too advanced for the ship's supposed age, a mystery she couldn't explain. Theo, unable to resist, slowly opened the box, revealing a blackened, cracked object inside that pulsed faintly with a dark glow. As soon as the box was opened, a cold shiver ran through the team, and the water around them seemed to grow darker. Theo's breathing became shallow as his head throbbed painfully, his thoughts clouded with something unfamiliar and malevolent. "We need to get this back to the lab," Nina said, though her instincts screamed at her to leave it where they'd found it. They made their way back to the submersible, the cursed object in tow, unaware of the darkness it had already begun to unleash. Hours later, as they prepared to ascend, Theo started acting strange, his gaze distant and hands twitching uncontrollably. "Are you okay, Theo?" Elena asked, her voice full of concern as she noticed the cold sweat dripping from his brow. Theo didn't answer, instead muttering incoherently as he stared at the cursed artifact now sitting inside the submersible. The lights flickered, and Theo suddenly lunged at Nina with a wild look in his eyes, his hands reaching for her throat. Nina dodged, barely avoiding his grasp, and shouted at Elena to help subdue Theo as he became more erratic by the second. Elena grabbed a sedative from the emergency kit, managing to inject it into Theo's arm just as he screamed in rage. Theo collapsed, but Nina and Elena were shaken, the realization dawning that the curse was far more dangerous than they'd thought. "It's the box," Nina said breathlessly, staring at the artifact as it pulsed with an eerie, rhythmic glow. Elena nodded grimly, her scientific curiosity battling with the overwhelming dread that filled her every thought. They knew they couldn't leave, not until they understood what was happening and how to stop the curse from spreading. Hours passed in tense silence as the submersible floated near the wreck, the cursed artifact sitting ominously between them. Theo stirred, his eyes opening slowly, but there was something different in his gaze, something dark and violent. "We have to destroy it," Nina said, her voice firm despite the terror gripping her heart as Theo's condition worsened. "But how?" Elena asked, her fingers trembling as she looked from the artifact to Theo, who now watched them with a sinister smile. "Back on the ship," Nina said, gesturing to the wreck below them, "there might be something there that can end this." With no other option, they reluctantly prepared to return to the shipwreck, leaving Theo secured in the submersible for now. The water felt colder this time, and as they entered the wreck again, the darkness seemed thicker, more oppressive than before. As they moved deeper into the ship, strange whispers echoed in their ears, though neither dared to speak aloud. In a sealed chamber at the heart of the wreck, they found an altar, and on it was a hammer made of the same black stone as the artifact. "This has to be it," Nina whispered, though her instincts warned her that destroying the artifact might bring its own consequences. They carried the hammer back to the submersible, where Theo sat, now eerily calm but watching them with dark, calculating eyes. Elena glanced nervously at Theo, her heart pounding as she gripped the hammer tighter, knowing what had to be done. Nina placed the artifact on the floor and raised the hammer above her head, her hands shaking with fear and doubt. "Do it," Elena urged, her voice barely audible over the deafening silence that filled the small space. Nina hesitated for just a second before slamming the hammer down, shattering the artifact into pieces with a deafening crack. The moment the artifact broke, a wave of dark energy burst from it, sending them both crashing into the walls of the submersible. Theo screamed, his body convulsing violently as the curse fought to hold on, but within moments, he collapsed, unconscious. The oppressive darkness in the water outside began to lift, and the whispers that had plagued them finally faded into silence. Elena checked Theo's pulse. He was alive, but his body was weak, and the curse seemed to have left him completely. "It's over," Nina whispered, though deep down, she knew that the horrors they'd faced would haunt them forever. As they ascended to the surface, the ocean seemed eerily calm, as if the depths themselves were finally at peace. Back on the ship, the team remained silent, their minds consumed by the events that had nearly destroyed them. Theo woke up hours later, his memory of the curse hazy, but he knew something dark had touched his soul. Elena sat beside him, her mind racing with thoughts of what they'd uncovered and the consequences it might have. "We need to tell someone," she finally said, her voice trembling as she thought of the ancient evil they'd unleashed. Nina shook her head slowly, her eyes hollow with the weight of what they'd done and what the world wasn't ready to know. They sealed their findings, burying the truth deep within classified reports, hoping the curse would never resurface. But as they sailed back to shore, Nina couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed them from the depths. In the distance, far below the waves, something stirred, its malevolent presence lingering in the forgotten wreckage. The cursed ship, now a graveyard of secrets, waited patiently for its next victims to stumble upon its haunted remains. And deep in the cold, dark abyss, the ancient evil that had once been awoken would never truly sleep again.